Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the world of Formula One, specifically looking at how much it's booming in Canada.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
We'll look at the Canadian Grand Prix itself, the race coming up, and also this really interesting attempt someone made to actually rank the current drivers.
Yeah, which is always fun, always controversial. But yeah, Canada and F1, it's a great moment. You've got this deep history there, but now this new energy.
Exactly. And that energy sort of focuses on Montreal, a classic race, but one facing, well, some pretty modern problems, it sounds like.
Definitely. And then there's always that debate, isn't there? How do you actually judge these drivers when the cars are so different?
Right. So the material we're digging into today, it comes from a discussion among some F1 journalists, commentators, people who really follow the sport closely.
They've been watching all this, analyzing the Montreal circuit, its issues, its future,
Mm.
and they put together this collective ranking of the grid.
So our mission here is basically to unpack what they were saying, understand why F1 is suddenly so big in Canada, get into the weeds on the Montreal race, the pressure's there.
Dissect that whole driver ranking thing,
Yeah.
which is inherently subjective, but, really insightful.
And just give you the most interesting takeaways on F1 right now using this Canadian angle as our way in.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, that popularity surge in Canada. It feels like more than just numbers, doesn't it? You almost feel it.
You really do. I mean,
Yeah.
globally, you absolutely have to mention Drive to Survive. It just brought in this massive, completely new audience,
Hmm.
and that definitely hit Canada hard. People who maybe never watched a race before suddenly got hooked.
The Canada wasn't exactly starting from zero with F1, was
Oh,
it?
not at all. That's the key. It landed on, like, fertile ground. You've got the legacy of Gilles Villeneuve, just legendary.
Of course.
Then his son, Jacques, winning the championship back in '97. More recently, Nicholas Latifi, and now Lance Stroll on the grid. So there's always been that connection.
So Drive to Survive gave it a huge boost, but the spark was already there.
Exactly. It had something to ignite. And the sources, they pointed to the evidence race attendance in Montreal, always strong, TV numbers good, but they've climbed even more as F1 got bigger across North America.
And there was that anecdote, the one about seeing F1 gear.
Yeah, that really stood out to me too. One of the commentators was saying, you just walk around Toronto now, and you see people wearing McLaren hats, Ferrari shirts, Aston Martin jackets.
Stuff you wouldn't have seen much before.
Right. They made the point that even just 10 years ago, seeing F1 merch out and about was, like, genuinely rare. Now, it's common.
That tells you something, doesn't it? It's broken through.
It really has. It shows it's moved into the general public consciousness. The source is called the support right now massive. F1 seems to have real momentum in Canada.
And that momentum all leads to the Canadian Grand Prix weekend in Montreal. Classic track, Circuit Gilles Villeneuve on Notre Dame Island. But that location, it causes some headaches.
It's a fantastic circuit. Drivers love it. It's fast. It's challenging. But yeah, being on an island, logistics are tough. Space is really tight.
Uh-huh.
Access isn't easy. One of the journalists in the discussion used the phrase creaking in terms of limitations for the infrastructure.
And that means the people running the race, the promoters, they have this enormous task every single year. It's not like a permanent facility.
Not even close. Most of it is temporary. Grandstands, hospitality suites, all that stuff. They basically have to build it from the ground up every year.
Wow.
And they often start in the winter, like clearing snow to start building foundations.
Mm.
It's a massive, massive effort.
But it sounds like they are trying to address things, making investments, especially looking ahead to 2025.
Yeah, definitely. The sources mentioned plans for changes. A big refresh for the paddock area was mentioned specifically.
Okay.
They're also looking at different fan zones, maybe trying to spread people out better.
Yeah.
And there's talk of a new app to help people navigate, which, given the layout, could be really useful.
It feels like there's a bit of extra pressure on this year's event, maybe for its longer-term standing.
That was the sense, yeah. It's seen as a big year for the organizers to really prove itself to Formula One. Apparently, F1 management noted some difficulties back in 2024.
And the contract situation plays into that too?
It does. The current deal runs to 2029. There might be some wiggle room because of COVID years, potentially an extension, but it's not set in stone.
Mm.
The feeling among the journalists was that Montreal probably pays a lower hosting fee than some of the newer circuits, and F1 will likely want more money for any future deal. So delivering a smooth, modern event is crucial for their negotiating position.
Got it. And just before we move off of the event itself, there was a warning about hotels in Montreal.
Yes, and they stress this quite a bit. if you're going or even thinking of booking, be very, very careful with hotels.
Why is that?
There have been consistent reports in recent years of hotels canceling bookings last minute only to relist them at much higher prices.
Yeah.
Price gouging seems to be a real issue around the GP weekend. So yeah, lovely city, great event, but be really vigilant with those accommodation bookings. Check confirmations, maybe use more reputable chains if you can. Just be aware.
Good advice. Okay, let's shift focus to the Canadian driver, Lance Stroll. He's obviously a big talking point when F1 comes to town. How do the Canadian fans generally see him?
Well, among the hardcore F1 fans, he's definitely known. They'll cheer for him for sure, especially if he pulls out a good result.
And the Aston Martin connection helps.
Yeah, the fact the team is owned by his father, Lawrence Stroll, who's a prominent Canadian businessman, that adds another layer. It makes it feel a bit like a home team.
And Montreal has been a decent track for him historically, hasn't it?
It has, actually. He scored his first ever F1 points there back in 2017. That was a big moment for him.
Yeah.
And yeah, he often seems to find a little bit extra at this particular circuit.
Looking at his whole career, though, the discussions seem to focus on this contrast. Very strong junior record.
Absolutely. Won that super competitive European F3 title against a stacked field.
Yeah.
You don't do that without serious talent.
But then in F1, flashes of brilliance podiums, that pole in Turkey.
Right. Moments where you see that ability shine through.
But the consistency, that's the question mark. Strange thing was how one person put it.
That seems to be the core puzzle with Lance.
Yeah.
The raw speed is there, the talent is there, but putting it together consistently race after race, especially compared to his teammates,
Yeah.
that's been the struggle.
And comparing him to Fernando Alonso, well, that's a tough benchmark for anyone.
Exactly. The source is called Alonso, one of the greatest all-around drivers ever seen. So yeah, measuring up to that consistently is
Yeah.
a huge ask.
Does his unique job security situation play into how people see him?
It inevitably comes up in discussions. In a sport where almost everyone else is fighting tooth and nail for their seat year after year, having that kind of security is, well, different.
Right.
Does it change the pressure, maybe reduce certain kinds of pressure? It's hard to say from the outside, but it's definitely part of the narrative around him.
And there was also a point about maybe fans feeling they don't quite know him. Like that withdrawal from the Spanish GP, it felt a bit unclear.
Yeah, that sense that he's quite a private person came through, which is totally his prerogative, of course. But sometimes it means fans find it harder to, connect or understand what's going on behind the scenes.
But shifting to this season, the sources did note something interesting, that maybe, despite qualifying struggles sometimes, his actual race performances have been stronger, perhaps even outracing Alonso on occasion.
That was definitely raised. Getting points in a car that's clearly not easy, maybe showing better race pace than Alonso sometimes lately. And they mentioned upgrades, like a new floor at Imola, maybe helping him find a bit more confidence or performance in the car.
So it adds another layer to the question of where he actually fits in right now among the current grid.
Precisely.
Right.
Which leads us perfectly into that ranking exercise they did.
Right, the pound-for-pound ranking.
Mhm.
Trying to take the car out of the equation, hypothetically. How did they even approach that?
Well, they had a panel, 8 F1 journalists. Each one ranked all 20 drivers 1 to 20. Then they somehow combined those lists to create a consensus ranking.
Okay, so what did that consensus list look like at the top?
No huge surprises at number 1. Max Verstappen, then Charles Leclerc 2nd, Oscar Piastri 3rd, Lando Norris 4th, and Lewis Hamilton 5th.
Okay, Piastri 3rd. That's really high for someone in only his second full season.
It is. And apparently he got quite a few second-place votes from individual journalists on the panel.
Wow.
It shows just how highly rated his current form and rapid development are, even putting him ahead of Norris and Hamilton in this combined view.
And Hamilton at 5th, that caused some discussion.
It did. The debate was basically, is 5th based on his incredible legacy and past achievements, or his performance right now in these ground effect cars?
Where he's sometimes been behind Russell.
Exactly. Russell beat him last year. Leclerc's often been quicker this year. So the question was, based purely on current form in this era of car, should he maybe be a bit lower? It's a tough call.
What about that Piastri versus Leclerc comparison at 2 and 3?
That was interesting, too. Leclerc's qualifying this year has been stunning, and his race pace has improved. But Piastri's immediate impact and consistency clearly impressed the panel hugely to put him right up there.
Any other notable points further down? Sainz just ahead of Albon, maybe?
Yeah, Sainz 8th, Albon 9th. Some might argue Albon's head-to-head record against teammates looks stronger recently. But Sainz' known ability to jump into almost any car and be quick straight away, his adaptability, that seemed to give him the edge in the panel's view.
And ranking rookies is always hard. Antonelli came in pretty high at 10th.
Very high for someone with basically zero F1 race experience. It shows they're ranking heavily on perceived potential from his junior career, especially when compared to someone like Isaac Hadjar, who had that great Monaco F2 weekend but was ranked lower at 14th. It highlights the guesswork involved with rookies.
Any others that surprised? Maybe Tsunoda or Gasly seemed low?
Tsunoda at 16th and Gasly at 11th were mentioned as potentially being a bit harsh in some eyes, given their performances at times.
But overall, despite all the arguments you could have about specific spots, what was the main feeling about the grid's quality?
Just how incredibly deep the talent pool is right now.
Yeah.
Phenomenal depth was the phrase used. Even the drivers ranked towards the bottom are exceptionally skilled, often champions in junior categories.
Yeah.
It just reinforces how high the standard is to even be in F1.
And it all comes back to how subjective this whole thing is.
Oh, completely. The same car idea is pure fantasy football, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your engineer, the team's strengths, track characteristics, they all matter so much.
Mm-hmm.
And different voters will weigh things differently. Current form versus career achievements versus just raw gut feel talent. There's no right answer.
Speaking of talent and how drivers develop, the sources also talked about the role of simulation. That seems like a huge shift.
It really is. You've got these younger drivers, the sim-native generations, who've basically grown up in advanced simulators.
Yeah.
Thousands of hours from a young age. That's totally different from how older drivers learned, which was mostly through real-world testing, something that's heavily restricted now.
So what does all that sim time actually do for them? What are the benefits?
Well, it builds muscle memory for how different cars react. It lets them practice things that are too risky in real life, like really aggressive overtakes without consequence.
Okay.
And crucially, it's vital for setup work. They spend hours with engineers in the sim, trying different settings, finding directions before they even get to the track.
Verstappen was mentioned as someone who still spends a lot of time on the sim.
Yeah, even now, as champion, his dedication to sim racing and practice was highlighted. Maybe it contributes to his adaptability. There was even a story about him practicing a specific move, like the one on Massa at Spa years ago, in a sim beforehand.
So for a young driver trying to get noticed now, being quick in the simulator is essential.
It's become almost a prerequisite. Teams use sim performance heavily to evaluate young talent for testing or reserve roles. If you can't translate your speed to their virtual environment, it's a big hurdle.
Are there still things the sim can't replicate perfectly?
Oh, for sure. Some drivers get